So yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Laura. I work at Open Book Publishers, especially focused on the marketing and library side. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, and especially to have all the authors from the Predatory Paradox presenting this absolutely wonderful book. So we have Amy Kerber here, we have Jesse Saki, we have Karnat Andraya, Glenn Cummings, Leon Beko, and Kurt Key. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Amy and we'll start this very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, hi everyone, thanks for being here. I'm going to see if I can share my screen real quick because I have just a few slides. Everybody able to see that?
Yeah.
All right, so like I said, thanks for being here today. Just a little bit of background on the book. I don't want to talk too long because I really want to leave time for my co-authors and then for Q&A. But this book is the final deliverable from a National Science Foundation award that we received in 2019. And it was called, the abbreviation was called STEP, but it was STEM Training and Ethics of Publication Practices. So we were awarded this grant to develop our initial goal was to conduct a research project and then develop an online training program on the topic of predatory publishing. So what is predatory publishing? That turns out to be a really difficult question. However, probably the most concrete definition or the most widely accepted working definition was one that was come up with in 2019 with the so-called Ottawa Working Group. And they defined it as a consensus definition. They said predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and/or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. So you've probably all received those suspicious emails in your inbox that say, you know, journal of so-and-so, whatever, we noticed you're an expert in whatever, which is probably has nothing to do with your actual area of expertise, and we'd like you to submit to our prestigious journal. And that's, you know, kind of the nutshell definition of what most people think of as predatory publishing and journals. So a little bit of a timeline, because I think for me anyway, when I started this project, the only thing I really knew about was Jeffrey Beall's list. So I thought it'd be good to just provide a little background. He first published his list in 2008 of suspect journals. And I think it was in 2012 that he's known for coining the term predatory publishing to characterize these journals. It started as a pretty small thing, but in 2015, kind of the flames got fanned when he added a journal, Frontiers, to his list, and they took issue with it and threatened lawsuits. It became very controversial. 2017, he removed his list, and he actually states in a published commentary that he did so because he was afraid of, you know, he was receiving threats, he's afraid of losing his job, all of this stuff. Now, there's still legacy versions of his list everywhere, but in any case, then in 2020, it's important to note, and this happened right midstream in our project, the scholarly community got away from using the terms blacklist and whitelist and switched to something like, I mean, it's not necessarily agreed on, but the terminology we ended up using was watch list and safe list to get away from any problematic connotations that might be affiliated with blacklists and whitelists. So anyway, in terms of our project, a very quick summary. When we were in the early research phases, I think we had two important discoveries that kind of shaped the outcome of our project, the eventual outcome. One is we found out very quickly, probably after our first 3 interviews, let's say, is that this was a much messier topic than we thought. I really think we would kind of, I think at the beginning, we kind of had the illusion that we would be the ones who found the magic way to distinguish what is predatory from what is not. And we found out very early that that is just not realistic for a number of reasons. And second is that we also discovered there's a lot of online training materials already available. And they were not necessarily being used or employed. And so for that, as well as some other kind of practical reasons, we, about midstream, halfway through the project, we decided to abandon the idea of an online training program delivered through a website, and instead became very interested in this idea of publishing an open access book, which led us to Open Book Publishers and led us to the final version that we're presenting to you today. So just a little case study, and this is covered in the introductory chapter of the book in more detail, but I think MDPI, which is a multidisciplinary digital publishing institute, is a great example, just a case study to illustrate why this is so complicated. This MDPI was added to Bill's list in 2014, but then removed in 2015 after they successfully appealed. There's a blog post by Paul Crocetta that says, really, it's probably more appropriate to call this publisher or characterize their practices as aggressive rent extracting rather than predatory. You know, whether you love them or whether you hate them, they're one of the fastest growing publishers. I guarantee you, I mean, I've reviewed articles recently for MDPI. I mean, they have a strong scholarly presence, published 36,000 articles in 2017, 167,000 in 2020. And I didn't update this to have the most current statistics, but I guarantee you it's still growing. 2019 overtook Springer to become the largest publisher of OA journals, predicted soon to overtake Taylor and Francis and become the 4th largest publisher in the world. You know, their impact factors are on the rise. They claim that they have a high rejection rate. And I think these last 2 bullet points are the key. Is some people love them, some people hate them. And the reason that some people love them is because they're trying to overcome all the problems that we've had with traditional scholarly publishing. You know, the process being so slow, peer reviewers being so uneven and unreliable. And then again, this last bullet point I think is really important. Whether you love them or whether you hate them, you're going to notice that all sorts of other publishers are adopting the same strategies as them. So it's really hard to just put a publisher like this in a box and say, this is bad and everyone else is good. But that's what made our project so interesting and worthwhile to us, I think. So yeah, so then fast forward to our book, which was the final product, available online. It is open access through the Open Book Publishers website. You can also order a print copy if you want to for a very reasonable price. We like to think that for now anyway, it's comprehensive. Now, the way the world is changing, I think a year from now, some of the content might be outdated. And it is audience focused. So at the end of every chapter, we include activities that really engage the readers themselves or really lend this book to being used in the classroom. And we hope we've provided some activities that make that useful. So I want to stop right there with my brief introduction and just let you know that I'm very fortunate that all of my co-authors are here. And each of us kind of took responsibility for a chapter, even though it is a co-authored book. So we're going to proceed through in the order of the authors the order of chapters that appear in the book. And I'm going to ask each author to talk just for a few minutes about the chapter that they wrote. So Dr. Echo, I think you're first. Did you want to share your slides or did you want me to share them?
Please do share them, yes.
Okay, I can do that. It's just going to take a minute to change that over.
Okay.
So. Okay, so now we should be seeing Dr. Echo's slides.
Okay.
I have a message that says screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. But can everybody see?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I can see, at least I can see the title. can you have the next lines down, please? Let's see. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here in among such august community of scholars, and it's been a pleasure, real pleasure, working with this interesting group. We all come from different intellectual and scholarly backgrounds, and we had fun working on this project. So my task was to talk about the legal and ethical aspects of quote unquote predatory publishing. So Amy, that's my last slide. Can we go to back to the first one, please? That's the last one. I'm going to talk about first of all the contours of the project, at least the legal and ethical side of it. Yes, that's it. Thank you. And then yeah, the next slide, please. That's the title of my chapter. So if you look at or at least the chapter I was responsible for. So I'm looking at the ethical and the legal side of predatory publishing. So this chapter, which I at least mostly wrote, explores the ethical, policy, and legal issues that were brought to the forefront by the so-called predatory publishing industry. And I used as a case study a case that was filed by the Federal Trade Commission. That's an agency of the United States government that is responsible for fair competition and for free trade and so on. So this agency saw predatory publishing as a violation of the laws of fair competition in the marketplace of ideas. And so this agency claimed that it had standing because US government agencies like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes for Health, and so on and so forth, were being used as fronts for the conferences of Omics. Omics is a group from India. Next line, please. And so the US government intervened after a lot of scholars had complained that their names were found on conferences when they really did not indicate that they were going to participate. So traditionally then, scholarly publishing operates through what we call a paradigm. A paradigm is a way of seeing the world, and it's all about the correct way of doing research, interpreting and publishing research under there are certain standards set by what we call the industry gatekeepers, editors, librarians, even the scientific community. And so this paradigm of research was taken for granted as the way things should be. And until it was challenged by the what we call the quote-unquote predatory publishers. And the predatory publishing industry emerged from two developments that happened. Number one, the development of information and communication technologies that kind of reduced barriers to the entry in the publishing industry, that is to say, the scholarly publishing industry that had been dominated by university presses, foundations, and some other presses that were commercial. So they posed a challenge, and as a result of new technologies, we had people who had said, oh, this is a free-for-all system, so they decided to participate in it. And the irony is that it is the system itself, the system of scholarly publishing, that decided to open the system up, because they said journals were becoming too hard for scholars to get into. They were becoming too elite, and it was becoming a closed system. So some scholars decided to propose the so-called open access publishing, and that's where we had the emergence of predatory publishers who decided to take advantage of it. Okay, next slide, please. So, next one, please. I think I probably did that twice. Yes, one more time. Thank you. So, Again, I mentioned that the United States government decided when omics became very aggressive, omics was organizing conferences. It had hundreds of journals that just emerged overnight. And so the US government decided to sue omics. And it sued omics at the Federal District Court in Las Vegas, Nevada, because omics, being an Indian company, it had an American branch that was in Las Vegas. And so the result of this, of course, this company was found liable for violating the laws of unfair competition, for fraud, and so on and so forth. As a result, with a new system developed, it used to be a system of self-regulation. Scholarly publishers and academic publishers regulated themselves. We had gatekeepers who made sure that the system worked and that whatever was published was good, was acceptable to everybody. All of a sudden, we have a system of regulated self-regulation. That is to say, we had the government now looking down and making sure that the publishing system is just, it's fair, it's legal, and it's ethical. So now all of a sudden we had a system where instead of having just ethics, we had the law to deal with. So this has now resulted in an overlap. There's an overlap between the language of ethics. Ethics is about morality and goodness and badness and rightness and wrongness of motives and ends and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, we now have to deal with the law. The law has to do with duty. The law has to do with rights and responsibilities and so on. So we had a system where the law commands, the law orders, and in this case, it ordered omics to pay $50 million in compensation. That's a command. Versus ethics, which recommends. Ethics is all about, hey, these are the standards, we must follow them, and so on and so forth. And so scholarly publishing then is now being judged on two grounds. For it to be acceptable, it must be consistent with the principles of law, and it must be consistent with the principles of ethics. So that is the system of regulated self-regulation that emerged from this omics case. And the last slide, which I'm not seeing right now, is which I want to conclude with, is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has kind of messed up, muddied the waters of publishing and even predatory publishing, because there are instances where we have certain questions like, what is going to happen? Are these predatory publishers going to take advantage of artificial intelligence to expand their activities? Are traditional publishers going to take advantage of artificial intelligence? What is going to happen with issues of copyright when it comes to artificial intelligence? And generally then, how is the law? Because we are talking about now a system of regulated self-regulation. Right now, there really are no laws that regulate artificial intelligence. Countries and regions, for example, the European Union in 2021 came up with standards of artificial intelligence that do not at this moment include academic publishing. And on October 30 this year, the Biden administration came out with its own artificial intelligence guidelines. So artificial intelligence is something that will be an instrument of good or an instrument of evil in this whole publishing mess. So like Amy said, nothing is settled in stone. So we put that little epilogue in this chapter to show that there is something around the horizon that is coming, which we do not know really how it will affect the law and the ethics of academic scholarly publishing. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo, very much. Kirk, would you like to go next?
I'm going to continue. Hi, my name is Kirk T, and I'm a professor in the Department of Professional Communication in the College of Media Communication at Texas Tech University. And I'm going to talk briefly about chapter two, which is about the relationship between open science and open access, two different movements. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm just briefly talk through a couple of the points that I found interesting in our research while writing this particular portion of the book. The first thing that I found interesting was that there is a misunderstanding and confusion between the two separate movements of open science and open access. As many of you probably know, that there has been a recent emphasis on the open science movement as a very important movement in academic research in general. But when we look into the history and the origin of what triggered the emergence of the open science movement, what we really found was that the open science movement really emerged to address the replication crisis, primarily in the field of psychology. So as we know that the replication crisis refers to the observation that several seminal studies, especially in experiment psychology, could not be replicated. So a series of practices emerged to address this problem. And some of these practices really want to highlight and emphasize the possibility of increase the likelihood of reproducibility, replicability, and generalizability. However, because open science and open access share the same word open in their names, these two movements have been often collapsed by a lot of the people that we interviewed in our study. And many of these people that we study and interview actually acknowledge that they're not sure if these two are separate movements. Many of them assume that they are the same, meaning if you practice open science, you will naturally want to publish your research in an open access manner as well. However, when you think more about this, if the open science movement emerged to address the replication crisis, how does publishing your research in an open access fashion address the issue of replication crisis? No, it doesn't. It just basically share your research openly with the world. So one of the things that we really want to acknowledge is that due to this confusion and this misunderstanding, it creates this condition in the academic publishing ecosystem to allow predatory journals to take advantage of this and to thrive. So that's the first insight that I would like to share. The second one is that many of us in the academy, and when I say many of us, I'm referring to the broader sense of all of us who are involved in the academy in some fashion. Too often we assume that this is not a big problem, or this problem doesn't affect us. And many of us think this way because we think that falling prey to predatory journals is mostly a problem experienced by junior scholars or graduate students, most of whom are in the outside of the Euro-American academic circle. Because of that reason, we just assume that this is not a problem, or at least not a problem to us. However, in our research, during our interviews, we found that this is actually quite a prevalent problem. In fact, this affects us in a way that it created this condition in our academic publishing ecosystem, and it actually has a direct and indirect impact on us as well. Similar to what Amy shared with us earlier in her opening slide, that whether you like the publishing model of NDPI or not, because of their success and because of their growth, many of the mainstream traditional publishers are also adopting their model as well. So I want to point out that what we think may not be a problem can come back and affect us. And because of this reason, many of us just assume that informal mentoring is enough to address this problem of predatory journal. But we also found in our research that relying on informal mentoring is not sufficient, because when we assume that it's happening, it may not be happening or not happening at the extent to which we need to see in order to address the problem. Another layer of this complexity is that we also notice that For some of the senior scholars in different fields, they have also fallen prey to the problem of predatory journal and predatory publishing, not because they willingly choose to do so, but because they co-author with graduate students and junior scholars who accidentally submit the work to predatory journals, and therefore their names also became associated with work published in predatory journals. And this particular situation also created a more of a gray area in this problem of predatory publishing. So these are the two highlights that I love to share about chapter 2 in our book. And with that, I will end my comment here and pass this back to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirk. So next in our lineup is Jesse Starkey, who wrote chapter 3. And I don't know if you had any slides, Jesse.
No, I don't have any slides.
Okay.
So I
Okay,
will just
sounds good. Take it
launch
away,
on.
please.
So my name is Jesse Starkey, and I was lucky enough to be the PhD research assistant with this amazing team. And so I wrote the chapter Research Quality, Understanding Definitions and Challenges to Quality in the Knowledge Production Process. And if anybody has ever read Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, you'll recall that quality is a core concept in that philosophical journey and is notoriously hard to define. But that's actually what we asked in some of our interview questions, because really, quite simply, quality has become a pressing matter, and really the very livelihoods of many academics depend on what is quality in their work. And so one of our interview questions asked participants to define quality, and then who gets to judge quality in terms of academic research and knowledge production. And even as a second-year PhD student, when we were working on this, I quickly recognized that the complexity of answers that we were getting from our interview participants uncovered this incredibly nuanced idea of what is quality. And so it became, in the findings of my chapter, and with this research, our participants were much easier able to define where quality was missing. And of course, predatory publishing was the backdrop to all of this. And so there was a very distinct notion that predatory publishing created this void of quality in the academic world, but there were other nuances with that. So other ideas that came across in our research that were challenges to quality was this constant pressure to publish, right? It's that the publisher perish paradigm in academic research. So dealing with the constant cycle of rejections, right? We consider journals that have high rejection rates to be quality journals, which means the academics that are getting rejected have to deal with that rejection and the psychological impact that that can have. And then also one of the other things that Kirk touched on, and Corinne will touch on in her chapter, is the mentorship for junior researchers and how that can be a lack in quality. So, but again, we did push our participants to try and define quality. And so while they more easily went to where quality was lacking, where they kept, when we finally could get definitions, there were a few key points that really came to light. So institutional culture was hugely important. So if researchers and administrators from the top down pushed for ethical research practices, that filtered all the way from the top to the bottom. The modeling of ethical research behavior by those senior researchers became essentially very crucial for quality. A commitment to ethical behavior, even when no one was looking. That was something that researchers brought up time and time again. They said, unless we're being open and authentic and modeling that research behavior, the quality will be lacking. And that was very much addressed in Kirk's chapter with open science and open data. And then a dedication to transparency and other things that were much harder to define, so that were almost as equally hazy as that concept of quality itself, right? Knowing your field, that leads to quality research. Taking the time to think deeply about those things. And then peer review. Peer review of course, is the hallmark for what is quality research. But while it was also placed as a challenge in that some aspects of the peer review process are broken, it was also still held as a marker of quality, both for journals and as a quality assessment for individual manuscripts and as a gatekeeping device. And that brings me to the final portion of my chapter, which asked our participants to discuss who gets to judge quality, right? For in order to assume whether there's quality or not, it has to be judged. And what it came down to is every stage of the knowledge production process has different gatekeepers. So for graduate students and their training, where we train our junior researchers, faculty were the ultimate judges of quality. Before publication, self-regulation and peer debriefing were held up as ways to assess quality before publication in the research process. Within the vetting of scholarly publications, there's peer review again, right? That was the ultimate judge and gatekeeper of how research gets into there. And then finally, we get to the dissemination and the production of our academic research articles. And that was where the biggest difference came out in our research, because there was an institutional idea of how research should be judged and the individual. And we have all these third-party organizations now. There's DOAJ, which is indexing, and COPE, which has put the Committee on Publication Ethics, which gives different journals markers of credibility. Then we have different indexes. We have your Google Scholar indexes, and all of these things are attempting to judge quality. And so really, while I set out thinking, I will find this absolute definition of what is quality in research, what it came down to is that quality is an incredibly nuanced idea within institutions, even within different research areas, and that it comes down to, as Leo touched on, a very ethical process in order to look at quality, and also that it is, again, those ethics that are some of the biggest challenges to quality. So thank you so much, and I will pass it on back to Amy.
Thanks, Jessie. And so I will now turn it over to Corrine, Dr. Corrine Arden-Dreyer.
All right, so I will share my screen. And hopefully, all right. So I'm Corrine Arden-Dreyer. I am an assistant professor here at Texas Tech University, and actually I'm now in the process of moving to associate, so we'll see in a few months, maybe that will change. And I really had the pleasure of being part of this team. And my role, since I'm the STEM person, was the responsibility on topic related to STEM and also on early career. So this is the kind of information you can expect from my chapter. So the chapter was really about how to avoid predatory journal, and especially when it comes to early career. And we're talking about graduate student and even some junior scholar, postdoc, assistant professor who are just starting the position. And I start the chapter talking about my personal experience, because it almost happened to me. When I was a postdoc at Harvard, I got an email from a journal as an early scholar, and I knew I need to publish to even get a faculty position or apply for a faculty position. I was super excited that a journal contacted me. And at the time, I had no idea what a predatory journal was. So if you read that chapter, you will hear about you will see my experience, and you will see what happened at the end. So I'll leave it to you to look into that. But in this chapter, we are talking about the awareness of the problem, and where are the places that it's a bigger problem, who are the ones who are impacted. Majority of them are early career. As we heard before, if you're not aware as a graduate student, when you get those emails for conference or for publication, you're really excited. And not all the time you have a good mentoring. And us as mentoring, we have a big role to advise our early career on predatory journal and allow them to identify when is a safe place to publish your publication and when is not so safe, and what you should do in order to verify, is this a journal you would like to publish? So we do have some suggestion about how to improve your mentoring. And also, we have to understand that for a lot of the early career, having these publication is super important, because some of them have to have publication in order to even graduate, depending on the places that they submit or do their degree. We also talk about the differences for a junior scholar. If you're applying for a teaching institute versus a research institute, there might be differences in terms of how your package need to look like, and publication play a big role. We also talk about what are strategies and tools you can identify in order to think, is this journal I'm thinking about submitting my work is suspicious or not? And these tools, we're just showing here a list of these different strategies and things you can do in order to identify. We also provide some information about checklists and other information that are available online. And we also created this little list that you can go through and check mark. And we're really hoping that first, as mentoring, we will be there for our student and for our early careers, because they need us. This is a new avenue for them. We, with our experience, can be there to guide them. But also for us, sometimes it's not as easy to identify if a journal is predatory or not. Should it be on the watch list, on the safe list? So we can also follow these lists to identify if this journal we're thinking about submitting our work is a good one or not. We also, at the end of our chapter, have a very nice activity. We perform in 2 times. We perform it in my class, which was a graduate class, and also for an Earth Science Women Network community. And it was very interesting to see the activity and what the student and graduate student and also the junior faculty thought about this activity. So we really recommend you to try it, to do it, and we're hoping you'll enjoy this chapter and the book as well.
Thank you, Corinne. So last but not least, we have Dr. Glenn Cummins.
Good morning or afternoon, whichever the case may be. Can everyone see the slides that I shared really quickly? Perfect. So really quickly, I want to go through sort of what the focus of this chapter was all about. So as Dr. Kerber mentioned a few minutes ago, we originally went into this project, and I will say personally, I went into it with a fair amount of naivete, thinking, hey, wouldn't it be great if we developed some sort of online training material? And as we very quickly discovered, again, there is certainly no shortage of training materials that are out there. So then we quickly pivoted to trying to develop some sort of assessment of, all right, if the training materials are out there, what are the common characteristics? And more importantly, what are the gaps in these training materials? What are the things, the deficiencies possibly within these different training materials? So the contribution in this chapter of the book is a review of those different online resources that are out there, because again, some of you guys may be very familiar with, again, resources that you've created for your library, or possibly some type of resource that your library already offers to the academic community. And I emphasize library because typically these training materials are products of a library. There were some that we discovered that were produced maybe within a college or a research lab group, but more often than not, it's some sort of library guide. So what this chapter presents, and I'll give you just the tiniest bit of detail on what it presents here. We looked at different resources from libraries that were provided. We looked and coded for whether or not there was a definition offered of predatory publishing, because again, some people have a very strong knowledge, whereas some people are very unfamiliar with this term, and that's something that we've discovered in this research process. We also looked at whether or not the library guides offered some sort of characteristics, what the typical markers, red flags of a potentially predatory publisher. And we also looked at whether or not these library guides looked at or discussed some of the dangers and problems with predatory publishing. Again, among many different factors that we looked at in these library guides. So just to give you one example, again, this is a completely arbitrary selection of one of the resources that we looked at from the University of Arizona. But you can see that a fairly comprehensive library guide that does provide a definition of predatory publishing. You can also see some language there describing why this is problematic and why it might want to be avoided. Also within that guide, a checklist, so to speak, of different characteristics, hallmarks of potentially predatory publishing. So again, this is provided just to give you a sense of what we examined in this particular part of the book. And another thing I should add is that this part of the book also provides a database of all the different resources that we discovered. So again, there's quite a few that are out there. One thing that we discovered is that most of these library guides did not offer a definition. Only 44% of the resources we found offered some sort of formal definition of predatory publishing. But in contrast, some sort of checklist, some sort of red flags, markers, indicators of a predatory publisher were much more common. What was not common within these different resources is a broader discussion of why this is problematic, why a scholar might want to avoid predatory publishing, potential impacts on their career, economic impacts, etc. One other thing that we also examined, again, among a host of different characteristics, was whether or not there's any type of assessment of learning, because quite often these resources are presented as a one-way sharing of information with the community with no sense about whether or not these materials are effective, whether or not any actual learning takes place. So we also coded for the presence of some type of assessment of learning. And for example, one we found, again, going back to this particular library guide, was very simple. Was the guide helpful? Yes, no, or other type of question. And I offered that one as an example to simply underscore the fact that we only found 2 such assessments of learning within the entire project. Only 1.3% of our sample of resources we looked at had some sort of assessment of effectiveness. So in terms of like a gap in the literature, that type of assessment of a learning outcome is something that is sorely lacking and something that could be used. Again, what we encourage is an active engagement with junior scholars, in particular, emerging scholars, junior scholars, those who may be less familiar with predatory publishing. And I'll end with actually how the chapter begins. There's an epigraph at the very beginning of the chapter that states, "It's tempting to toss off a quick, don't give them your work to publish, problem solved." And I offer that because quite often, and one thing I've discovered is that's the attitude of many scholars within the academic community is like, I know predatory publishing, just don't publish there. And again, the problem is much more complex than simply telling people don't do that. Again, what our book reflects is a much more comprehensive, hopefully a holistic view of why it exists, why some scholars may deliberately choose to publish in a predatory journal. Again, looking at global inequities within the academic publishing process. And again, hopefully, collectively, the entire book shines a light on this growing problem within the literature. And each chapter offers some sort of contribution as well as specific activities that we hope the academic community engages with and uses to address this growing problem of predatory publishing. So with that said, Amy, I will turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you very much. So we have a few minutes. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I'll be glad to field questions, either if you want to talk or if you want to put them in the chat. Glenn, you may want to stop screen sharing. It just may make it easier to. Thanks.
Thank you. Didn't realize I hadn't.
No.
I think
Anyone
one
have
thing,
questions or comments? Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious about is our audience and those joining us today.
Yeah.
Again, we find that the library community is very active in this space, whereas those working in other disciplines were less engaged and I wouldn't say more flippant. Some are very interested, but I'm kind of curious about those joining us, where you might be from and what your interest is in the book.
Yeah, me too. I'd love to know about people's experiences too, whether you're authors who've been sort of targeted by these journals or whether you're in leadership roles at your institutions where you've had to field questions on this.
Looks like people are muted. Let me ask our audience one question. Would you what would you think of artificial intelligence taking over the peer review process in academic publishing? What if we cut out the human element and we say we put all the papers into some kind of an artificial intelligence software and it comes out with accepted or rejected?
Liombe, it's Rory McGrail. I'm the editor of an open access journal in Canada. And we've looked into that, and I've used artificial intelligence for reviews. And I've used ChatGPT and Bard, and it's not there yet. It can't do it. What they do, what I find is it gives very positive reviews and praising the work, whatever it is, without any substantive comments. And when I ask it to do a negative review, it is just less positive. It doesn't really give a negative review. But I do believe that at some point it will be able to do as good a review, actually better than most of our reviewers. Out of us, 2 out of 4 reviewers that we get do not give us good reviews. If we get 2 good reviews from humans for an article, we're very pleased. I think there's potential there for it to help us with reviews. And my view is we should use it if it becomes accurate enough and helpful enough to give a good review. Then we should use it. We're just not there yet at this point.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
But I guess just a follow-up question though, Rory, would there still be, wouldn't you always have to have a human involved to be assessing the quality of that review and kind of cross-checking it against reality?
Well, we have editors and we cross-check all the reviews. And so that's there.
That's true.
Now, my view of it was that if it was good enough, I would have used it, but also used human authors. And I would keep doing that until I found that the chat reviews were just so good that we didn't need the human authors. And at that point, maybe I would allow some articles to be accepted or rejected solely based on artificial intelligence reviews. But I think there'd be a temporary period where we would have to use both, I'd say, for at least 5 years or more in order to ensure that the AI is doing the job correctly. I say the same teachers, if you can be replaced by AI, you will be, and you should be. And the same way with any job. If you're a carpenter and you can be replaced by a robotic carpentry, then you will be, and you should be. And I think our reviewers are in the same position. And so I'm not optimistic about it. I'm just being realistic about it. I don't particularly like the idea that AI reviews are better than we are as humans. But if that's the reality, then that's the reality.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your perspective. And I'm glad that Leo asked this question. So kind of another funny, interesting anecdote about our book. So ChatGPT was kind of unleashed on the world and, started to receive a lot of media coverage in November of last year, 2022. Well, at that point, we were putting the finishing touches on our manuscript because our deadline was December 31st of 2022. So needless to say, we didn't really have time. The timing just didn't work out for us to extensively address AI in the manuscript, which in some ways is unfortunate. But, I think everyone who's written a scholarly book realizes that at some point you've got to finish it. You can't keep adding updates. But in any case, we were able to interject just a little bit of So Dr. Echo added an epilogue to his chapter, and then I was able to revise the conclusion chapter and added just a little bit of text. But I think that's a whole nother, that could be a second edition if we wanted it to be, because it's just going to, it's obviously changing the landscape of everything. So I see some comments in the chat here, but we're also pretty close to the end here. So yes, Darina Makova says, I do international law, but predatory journals almost colonize Eastern Europe. And yes, the issue of global inequalities. Yeah, and we mentioned that in our brief presentations here, but it's definitely addressed throughout the book that this is one of the quandaries, because we do have this instinct where we want to make a clear distinction between journals that are predatory and journals that are not. We end up coming up with these criteria, and oftentimes one of the criteria you see is, oh, the journal, if the journal doesn't have a very sophisticated website, that may mean that it's predatory. But that's really problematic, because that may mean it's a very good journal, but they're just operating with limited resources. We really have to do everything we can to provide support and nurture those emerging journals that are oftentimes in less research-rich nations, but we need to have a venue for that scholarship. So anyway, it's just another one of those paradoxes that we ran into.